Well, hello everyone. This week the Sota Explore Team brings you to a whole new meaning of Minnesota Gneiss, spelled G-N-E-I-S-S. I am standing on some 3.5 billion year old rock, exposed during a cataclysmic event that is now used in buildings and monuments all over the continental U.S. This rock is called Morton Rainbow Gneiss, and it has a fascinating story. I hope you come along for the ride. We are starting our story this week at the Morton Outcrop Scientific and Natural Area. This area is maintained by the Minnesota DNR and is a bit of a hidden gem. There are no formal trails or interpretive center, but if you take some time to do some research and then come visit this area, you'll find it extraordinarily interesting. This site is about 15 acres and gives you a good idea of how the bedrock found around Morton, Minnesota would have looked after the last ice age and formation of the Minnesota River Valley. I'll get into that more here in a little bit. I should mention, for those of you visiting this area and hoping to use a drone to take some photography, you will find this area in Class E airspace, and to be legal, you'll need to file for Lance approval due to the local airport here just a few miles to the west being used for a medical helicopter. The Morton Rainbow Gneiss found in this area is some of the oldest rock on the planet. It was part of the Earth's crust formed 3.5 billion years ago deep beneath the surface of the Earth. The molten rock cooled slowly, forming grains of crystallized minerals. About 1 billion years later, two fragments of the Earth's crust collided at the future location of southwestern Minnesota, subjecting the granite to heat and pressure. These forces melted it once again and allowed intrusions of molten pink granite. The two granites folded and twisted. When they eventually hardened, the twists and folds remained. 800 million years later, another geologic heating event added additional color and texture. When cut and polished, Morton Nice shows bands or swirls of black, pink, and gray, with white flecks that sometimes look like galaxies and nebulae floating in space. The rock's colors come from quartz, which is white, potassium feldspar, which is pink, I'm going to mispronounce this one, plagioclase, feldspar, which is light gray, and biotite, and another mispronunciation I'm sure, biotite amphibole, which is black. You're going to have to forgive me, I'm not a geologist, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. All of those geologic events happened to create an area of Earth's bedrock that, once we were able to view it, is really quite beautiful. This is a piece of Morton Nice, and it is kind of hard to believe that this was once part of Earth's bedrock and crust. Much more recent in history, if you can call the end of the Ice Age recent, an event happened that changed the landscape of this area of Minnesota. As the last ice age retreated, it left a large moraine of gravel and rock in the area of what is now Browns Valley, Minnesota. The melting glaciers also formed a huge glacial lake called Glacial Lake Agassiz. Just FYI, the lake was named in 1873 after Louis Agassiz, who was one of the first scientists to propose that the Earth had experienced a prehistoric ice age. I think you need to do some driving in both the provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan to truly understand the distance that both of these provinces cover. But this lake covered a large area of both of them, and it was immense. Somewhere between 11,500 and 13,500 years ago, the waters of Glacial Lake Agassiz overtopped this glacial moraine, and a cataclysmic flow of water formed the River Warren. This river ended up forming the Minnesota River Valley, washing away all of the layers of soil down to and exposing the Morton Nice bed. Scientists, using radioactive dating, had a pretty accurate measurement of how old the Morton Nice was. And as I mentioned before, it was measured at 3.5 million years ago. 3.5 billion years ago. It was thought to be the oldest rock, exposed bedrock on Earth. It wasn't until more recently where some Acosta gneiss found up in the Northwest Territory of Canada was measured to be 4.03 billion years old. But anyway, it's still some of the oldest rock on Earth, found right here in Morton, Minnesota. Well, let's bring you forward a few billion years to even more recent times, if you can call the 1880s recent. Morton, Minnesota was first platted in 1882 and was officially incorporated as a city in 1887. The community's origins are closely tied to the expansion of the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad, known back in the day as the Tootin' Louie, which surveyed the area in 1880 and ran its first train through town in the early 1880s. The town was subsequently named after the conductor of that first train. Quarrying the Morton Nice began around 1884. Initially, the stone was primarily used in ballast for the railroad tracks. This is the material laid down between the railroad ties to hold them in place. It didn't take long for the people to discover the beauty of the Morton Nice, especially when cut into larger slabs and polished. The industry grew significantly in the following few years. By 1886, major quarrying operations were established, at one point employing as many as 300 people. In 1900, a Swedish immigrant named John Anderson, who arrived in 1886 to work as the foreman of the quarry, became the owner of the quarry. He ran the quarry for many years, operating under the name of Anderson Granite Company. It was under Anderson's management that Morton Nice gained popularity as the material for buildings and monuments. In 1930, the quarry was sold to the Cold Spring Granite Company, which has been a major player in the region's stone industry for decades. The Cold Spring Granite Company still owns the quarry today. The stone gained immense popularity during the Art Deco era of the 1920s and 30s. It was frequently used as high-end facing stone for the lower floors of large, prominent buildings across the U.S., including the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, the Quest Building in Minneapolis, the Mariner Tower in Milwaukee, the Schott Tower in Detroit, and the Exchange Building in Seattle, Washington. bringing you even more recent in history, if you can call 1965 recent, we come to part of the story that I stumbled onto quite by accident, and it really is what piqued my interest in learning more about this old, beautiful granite rock. I had no idea of what it was and where it has traveled. I was quite surprised to find Morton granite in fountains in Washington, D.C., especially ones found in such a prominent spot. The story begins on February 11th of 1965, when First Lady Claudia Lady Bird Johnson convened the first meeting of the Committee for a More Beautiful Capital in the Red Room of the White House. The committee's goal was to revitalize Washington, D.C. through plantings, parks, and public art. As part of this initiative, the First Lady shared a specific architectural dream she wanted to frame the White House in water. Her vision was that everyone looking toward the Executive Mansion from the Washington Monument would see the view flanked by dramatic water displays. While her committee originally planned for 4 fountains around the eclipse, the plan was scaled back to 2. To bring the project to life, Mary Lasker, the president of the Society for a More Beautiful Capital, approached Enid Hopp for funding. Hopp was a wealthy publishing magnate and the influential editor-in-chief of 17 magazine. She was also a passionate horticulturist and philanthropist, who later funded the famous Enid A. Hopp Garden at the Smithsonian Castle. Hopp agreed to fully fund the monument. 2 fountains were created from huge slabs of Morton Nice and gifted to the Johnson administration as part of this project. Prominent architect Nathaniel Owings designed the layout, while California sculptor Gordon Newell and sculptor James Hinault oversaw the stone carving. Rather than casting classical figures out of bronze or carving ornate marble basins, the team chose to celebrate the raw ancient aesthetic of the earth. They sourced 2 monolithic 55-ton slabs of Morton Nice from Minnesota. The sculptors left the vertical outer edges rough and natural to display the rock's ancient twisted pink and black bands. They then highly polished the flat-topped surfaces so that when water bubbles up from the center, it sheets evenly over the smooth stone before dropping off the raw edges. Managed today by the National Park Service as significant landscape features of President's Park, the fountains remain precisely where Lady Bird Johnson intended. They sit on the main north-south axis of 16th Street and Constitution Avenue Northwest. They continue to serve their dual purpose, framing the White House when looking north and framing the Washington Monument when looking south. Well, thank you everyone for coming along on this week's adventure. I hope you found it at least a little bit interesting, and maybe the next time you're traveling through a little town of Morton, Minnesota in southwest part of the state, you'll understand a little bit of the history of the area. If you made it this far in the video, hit the like and subscribe button, please. And I can't wait to bring you along in the next adventure. Bye-bye, everybody.